Hello, friends. Thank you for joining this session of Masterclass in Pathology. My name is Dr. Rajal Shah. I am Dr. Charles Ashworth, Professor of Pathology at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. So today I'm going to talk about the diagnostic approach to prostate cribriform lesions. And for this particular session, I have shared 5 digital slides with you. So I hope you have got an opportunity to review these slides. And if you haven't, I would strongly encourage you to review them before you participate in this presentation. So let us get started. First, I will talk about the definition. So the word cribriform gland is derived from Latin word cribrum, means sieve-like. In this particular process, glandular epithelial cells, they form lumen-spanning proliferation with distinct holes and punches between the cells, imparting a Swiss cheese appearance as seen in this particular example. There are broad spectrums of prostatic lesions that can display cribriform architecture, which includes benign, premalignant, suspicious, and malignant and biologically aggressive entities, which I have listed here. Broadly speaking, the distinction of benign from remaining spectrum relies on careful evaluation of cytological features of the secretory cells, while the distinction of intraductal processes from invasive processes relies on careful evaluation of the presence or absence of basal cells. But in real life, this distinction is often not that straightforward. One has to rely on a systemic approach using combination of morphological features, status of basal cells, and in some instances, additional immunohistochemical markers such as PTEN and ERG before you arrive to a correct diagnosis. So I will talk about this systemic approach. So the first step in this evaluation is you want to have a careful cytological evaluation of secretory cells, which includes both nuclear features as well as cytoplasmic characteristics. Specifically, I asked whether is there any nuclear enlargement, coarse chromatin, prominent nucleoli, or nuclear pleomorphism. The assessment of cytoplasmic characteristics is also very, very important. Benign processes are typically characterized by eosinophilic or clear cytoplasm, while atypical spectrum is typically characterized by more amphophilic cytoplasm. So if a lesion has no cytological atypia in secretory cells and the cytoplasm is clear or eosinophilic, then you are dealing with one of these 3 potential situations: central zone glands, clear cell cribriform hyperplasia, or basal cell hyperplasia, and I will talk more about that later on. So the first important entity, and it is an anatomical variation that you really need to be aware and be comfortable when you evaluate prostate needle biopsies, is the central zone glands. This particular anatomical variation is typically gets confused with high-grade pain. So central zone glands is a posteriorly situated cone-shaped structure of the prostate with its apex at the verumontanum and base at the bladder base aspect. So these particular glands are typically sampled in biopsies which are targeted towards the base of the prostate. At low power, these glands can look pretty proliferative as shown in these examples. This type of morphology, particularly proliferative examples, are easily confused with high-grade pain, but they can also have pronounced proliferation, which may give them loose cribriform or Roman bridges, arches type of proliferation. So this type of proliferation can also get confused with atypical intraductal proliferation, suspicious for intraductal carcinoma. So they may potentially get confused with intraductal carcinoma when they are very proliferative and create a loose cribriform architecture. So the most helpful feature in my experience is the presence of cytoplasmic eosinophilia. You can see here that these glands have a distinct cytoplasmic eosinophilia. And remember, I talked to you that the atypical spectrum is characterized by amphophilic cytoplasm, while this distinct cytoplasmic eosinophilia are very, very helpful. When you have bridges, look at the nuclear features. Nuclei stream parallel to bridges in this reactive process compared to typically more perpendicular location in atypical spectrum. When ATPI is present, it is typically basal cell in nature. So that's again a very helpful feature. And again, note this distinct cytoplasmic eosinophilia. So rule of thumb that you need to keep in mind is that before you consider high-grade PIN or atypical intraductal proliferation diagnosis, particularly when you encounter biopsies from the base area of the prostate, you must rule out this particular condition before you contemplate that diagnosis. So that brings us to our digital slide 1. Understanding the clinical presentation is very important for this particular case. As you can see here, this is a transurethral resection of the prostate. So knowing the type of the specimen is a very helpful clue. Patient presented with urinary obstruction. So again, that's also important clinical presentation. So if we zoom in, you can see that there are several areas with numerous crowded proliferation of large cribriform glands. I think noticeable features here is that these glands appear quite large compared to the adjacent benign glands. They also have branching character. And if I look at this proliferation of these glands, I would essentially define them as a dense cribriform proliferation in which cytoplasmic proliferation is more than 50% of the luminal spaces. So this presence of large glands, branching nature, and dense nature of this cytocribriforming proliferation can easily mimic as intraductal carcinoma or cribriform carcinoma. But now we can pay attention to these features a little bit first at low power. So at low power, you see that this process has a distinct nodular architecture. That's a very, very helpful feature that usually would suggest a benign process. When we look at it carefully, these glands have a distinct clear cytoplasm. The cells lining these glands, if we pay attention to the secretory cells, clearly very bland epithelial cells. And the most important feature that you can appreciate is the presence of these prominently displayed basal cells. So that's very helpful feature. So collectively, this tells me that I'm dealing with a benign process, even though there is a quite confluent proliferation of these glands. And particularly, as I said, this nodular architecture, bland cytology, clear cytoplasm, and prominent display of basal cells are features that suggest the diagnosis of clear cell cribriform hyperplasia. So here are some still images of the case. Again, notice this nodular architecture, very important feature. The proliferation can be quite exuberant, but again, note that in the bridges, nuclei stream parallel to the bridges compared to perpendicular location that you expect for more atypical spectrums. I believe this is better appreciated in this particular example as seen here. And again, notice this prominently displayed basal cells. So in this particular condition, you really do not need basal cell marker to prove that you have a basal cells. The morphology is pretty distinctive here. So the diagnosis is clear cell cribriform hyperplasia. A clear cell cribriform hyperplasia represents a spectrum of benign prostatic hyperplasia. So it's typically restricted to the transition zone, and you are likely going to encounter in either transurethral resection of specimens, of prostate specimens, or in radical prostatectomy. But its presentation in needle biopsy, in my experience, is extremely rare. So let's move to another case. In this particular case, you see these cribriforming glands. Again, quite crowded proliferation of these glands. These glands appear quite dark, but if we look at it, why they look dark? Because you have very scant cytoplasm. In prostate cancer, the dark appearance is due to the amphophilic cytoplasm, while here the dark appearance is because nuclei occupy almost full cell height, a feature that is typically would argue against prostate cancer diagnosis. Another very helpful feature to note is this: look at this presence of very cellular spindly stroma as seen here. So this is a pretty characteristic stroma that you encounter in benign prostatic hyperplasia. That two features in combination are pretty characteristic of basal cell hyperplasia, which rarely can present with a very prominent cribriform architecture. So basal cell hyperplasia is again commonly associated with BPH, atrophy, and in the setting of anti-androgen therapy. So you are more likely to encounter them in transurethral resection of prostate specimens compared to needle biopsies. And it has three growth patterns. Large gland pattern typically is confused with high-grade prostatic intraepithelial neoplasia. Small gland pattern can mimic with acinar adenocarcinoma, grade group 1 with stratified epithelium, which can occur. And then example like I showed you, in which pseudocribriform or cribriform pattern can mimic with both cribriform carcinoma and potentially intraductal carcinoma. So again, paying attention to low power is critical in all these lesions. And note this here, how nodular or lobulated this proliferation is, that these glands almost essentially stop sharply here with completely normal appearing prostatic parenchyma on this particular aspect. And again, note this presence of cellular BPH-like spindle cell stroma, very, very helpful feature. When you see that particular feature, think about benign prostatic hyperplasia associated reactive proliferations. Based on the degree of cytoplasmic differentiation, basal cell hyperplasia has also been divided into complete form and incomplete form. In complete form, practically there is not going to be any cytoplasmic differentiation. So nuclei occupy full cell height. Another helpful feature is the nuclei are typically ovoid and are packed in a pack of cigar type of pattern with very limited cytoplasm in between. Nuclei are ovoid and coffee bean-like. You may even see some grooves within them. But an important pitfall to keep in mind is that prominent nucleoli are very easy to appreciate in basal cell hyperplasia, and that should not be confused with prostate cancer. So again, don't look at any particular feature in isolation. Incomplete form has a relatively more cytoplasmic differentiation, so they are sometimes more likely to be confused with prostate cancer if you pay too much attention to the cytoplasm. But again, note the cytoplasm is more clear in nature. And then microcalcifications and this type of hyaline globules are also quite common with basal cell hyperplasia. So the next very important spectrum is atypical cribriform lesions, cytologically atypical processes. So if you have secretory cells which show cytological atypia and your cytoplasm is amphophilic, then you are dealing with a spectrum of atypical cribriform lesions, which are enumerated here: cribriform peen, atypical intraductal proliferation, intraductal carcinoma, cribriform prostate cancer, and then finally ductal adenocarcinoma. So let us first try to understand the clinical significance of these entities. So recent studies have shown that the significance of cribriform high-grade peen as a predictive marker for unsampled prostate cancer has significantly reduced. Now it is in range of less than 25%. So in contemporary urology practice, patients often are not biopsied specifically if high-grade peen involves less than one core. I mean less than two cores specifically. because the cancer risk is essentially similar to benign prostate biopsies with elevated PSA. In comparison, atypical intraductal proliferation suspicious for intraductal carcinoma is, in our experience, typically a marker of unsampled intraductal carcinoma. It is also associated with more clinically significant prostate cancer. Intraductal carcinoma, ductal adenocarcinoma, and cribriform carcinoma are typically almost always associated with high-grade and high-volume prostate cancer. Now, I have seen that urologists often get confused between intraductal carcinoma and ductal adenocarcinoma, thinking that they are the one entity or similar condition. But I will talk about why they are not the same thing, even though ductal adenocarcinoma can have intraductal component. And another important thing that we will discuss is that when it is especially important to distinguish between intraductal carcinoma and cribriform carcinoma, because this is certainly has become a quite hot topic in prostate pathology. So the distinction in this particular spectrum is quite challenging, even though, as I said, that you can primarily focus on secretory epithelial cells and status of basal cells. That is not going to be enough in majority of lesions. So you have to develop a systemic habit of looking at the several morphological features, specifically whether you are dealing with a loose cribriform proliferation or solid or dense cribriform proliferation, looking at the cytological details of these cells, then the status of basal cells, number of cribriform glands, and in some instances, the presence or absence of PTEN expression are also very, very important in resolving differential diagnosis in this situation. So let us talk about this systemic approach. So the first very important thing that I ask always is that, are there any obvious features of invasion? What I mean by obvious features of invasion: do you have confluent cribriform proliferation or mass forming or almost balls of cribriform proliferation? Is cribriform proliferation showing irregular infiltrative borders? Do you see perineural invasion or extraprostatic extension in this type of proliferation? So if answer to this question is yes, then you are likely dealing with an invasive process. But if answer is no to these questions, then you are kind of essentially stuck with the entire spectrum, and we have to ask for a series of other questions, which I will talk once we go to that particular section. So here are some examples where I think that, in my opinion, this is an invasive process. Here you see crowded proliferation of numerous very confluent cribriform glands. You can almost have a difficulty drawing the outline of these cribriform glands. The proliferation is very dense and exuberant. You have irregular infiltrative borders. So when you see these type of examples, think about invasive process. And that brings us to our second case. This is from radical prostatectomy specimen. And as you can see here, that there is a quite exuberant proliferation of these very dense cribriform glands. They are almost making balls of cribriform proliferation. Look at how expansile these glands are. They are showing irregular borders. You see several features of invasion. Here you see perineural invasion, as seen here. In this particular area, you have extraprostatic extension. You clearly see these glands sitting within the fat plane of the radical prostatectomy. So there is no argument in this situation that you are dealing with an invasive cribriform carcinoma. You would grade this as a 4 + 4 = 8, which I will talk next. But when you have this type of situation, you really do not need basal cell markers to prove that you are dealing with an invasive process or an intraductal process. The morphology is pretty characteristic. And even though you may have some intraductal component in this situation, that would not affect the outcome of the patients. So if you think that there is some intraductal component, you can say adenocarcinoma 4+4 with cribriform morphology and intraductal features. That would be sufficient way to address this particular type of case. So the grading of cribriform carcinoma has also evolved significantly since the original description of Gleason grading by Dr. Gleason in 1967. Now a major departure in the 2014 ISUP modified Gleason grading system is that all cribriform cancers, regardless of the size and shape, are considered pattern 4 or 5 if associated with necrosis. So we really don't have to struggle anymore. Here is an example of what I would refer to as a small cribriform cancer, but note here how this irregular confluent process is. You also have some conventional prostate adenocarcinoma. Here is the example of large cribriform glands. Now, large cribriform gland has also been defined based on the number of lumina. Typically greater than 12 lumina are considered large glands. If you have glands size of the cribriform glands twice the size of adjacent benign prostate gland, that's also considered as a large cribriform gland. But for grading purposes, we really don't have to worry about whether we are dealing with a small or large cribriform glands. It is technically a pattern 4 or 5 if associated with necrosis. There is a robust evidence that now cribriform morphology impact clinical decision making for prostate cancer management. The presence of cribriform prostate cancer exclude patient from active surveillance. Patient need definitive therapy. It is also independent predictor of various adverse clinical outcomes, decreased progression-free survival, increased biochemical failure, and increased metastatic and mortality risk. So you would argue that a morphological parameter that has now been such strongly associated with clinical decision making, then this type of morphological parameter has to become very reproducible amongst pathologies. Otherwise, we could be really potentially mistreating the patients. But in real life, despite the definition I talked to you, there are going to be several situations where classification of cribriform prostate cancer can be quite challenging, particularly when you deal with complex fusion or papillary patterns, glomeruloid-like growth pattern, glands with showing partial only bridging or Roman type of bridging, complex mucin patterns, cribriform-like proliferation specifically around nerve. And then we talked about also size, small versus large gland. There is also quite a bit controversy. Some studies suggest that specifically large cribriform gland that is associated with adverse outcomes. So to address these issues, we recently undertook inter-observer agreement study amongst 27 experienced urologic pathologists. But the overall inter-observer reproducibility was only fair kappa of 0.40, indicating that there is a significant interpretational disagreement amongst urologic pathologists on some of the challenging spectrum of these lesions. Large cribriform glands had better agreement compared to small cribriform glands. Next, we look at the consensus diagnosis, which was associated with for cribriform or against cribriform prostate cancer, and then correlated with 11 morphological features. Interestingly, we could observe that there are certain morphological features that are highly reproducible for cribriform prostate cancer, which includes transluminal bridging. What I mean by transluminal bridging is the proliferation is end to end. There should not be any significant missing area within the gland. Majority of intraglandular cells should not be in contact with the stroma. But we have noticed that when you have a very large cribriform glands, they often are divided into multiple nodules of cribriform glands by intervening stroma. So that is still okay. As you see here that in this glands, majority of cribriform or majority of cells are not in contact with the stroma. lack of intraglandular mucin. That's very, very important. You can have cribriform glands floating within the pools of mucin, but there is no intraglandular mucin, and I will talk that more about that in subsequent slides. Then a clear luminal space should account for less than 50% of the gland circumference for the periphery of the gland. So what I mean by is that, as you can see here, that these are some of the peripheral luminal spaces, but they account for less than 50% of the glandular circumference. I think that you can see here in all of this one. So like an example like this, very small peripheral luminal space, if it is occupying a big part of the gland, then that is not associated with cribriform prostate cancer reproducible diagnosis. Here are some of the morphological features which are associated against cribriform prostate cancer for diagnosis. And as you can see here, that partial proliferation, partial bridging is typically against cribriform prostate cancer diagnosis. So this is a very important finding from the study. When you see only Roman bridges or only part of the gland showing proliferation, that may not be sufficient to call cribriform gland. In this particular example, you can see that majority of these cells are in contact with these blood vessels, which is part of the stroma. So this is in fact a papillary proliferation and not cribriform proliferation, but it does look pretty complex like cribriform proliferation. When you have a glomeruloid type of proliferation with only one point of attachment, that is consistently considered a non-cribriform glomerulation pattern 4. And then when you have mucinous fibroplasia, which can create complex morphologies, you typically have to exclude that mucin plugs from the analysis. So this is typically considered either pattern 4, non-cribriform, or some instances pattern 3. However, there were certain morphologies which were not associated for consensus for cribriform or against cribriform. There was significant non-reproducibility for these lesions. So in these examples, you have glomeruloid-like proliferation, but with multiple points of attachments. And as you can see here, that there is a peripheral luminal space, which kind of here almost accounts for 50% of the space. So this is again, I think, in kind of what we observed, it is better not to consider this as a full-blown example of cribriform prostate gland. When you have a nerve in the center, there is quite a controversy. Some pathologists even don't grade those type of components. And when you have a mucin rupture patterns, that can again create complex morphologies. So there is no consensus amongst these particular morphologies. So try to use these reproducible morphological features, which I shared with you for when you deal with some of these kind of more challenging spectrums. If you encounter this type of morphologies, then again, I think in my opinion, it would be conservative and not to overcall cribriform prostate gland till we have a better literature or evidence pointing the association of these type of morphologies with the outcome. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is that now both societies, the GU-PATH Society as well as ISUP, recommends reporting of cribriform prostate cancer. So I think again, knowing the reproducible features is very, very important. So if there are no features of obvious invasion, then we have several questions to ask. How many number of atypical glands we are seeing, few or numerous? Typically, cribriform high-grade pain is limited to few glands, while typically others atypical spectrums are going to have numerous glands. What is the size of atypical cribriform glands in relationship to benign glands? Similar size or large glands? When you have a significantly larger glands, that typically excludes high-grade pain from the differential. What is the gland contour and architecture? Do you have branching, which I usually find it very helpful for intraductal processes? what type of proliferation you are dealing with, dense or loose cribriform. We will talk more about that. Do you have solid or papillary or large duct type of morphology? What is the degree of cytological atypia? Pleomorphic cytology would typically indicate again an intraductal process compared to invasive processes. Is there presence of intraluminal necrosis? The presence of intraluminal necrosis would exclude benign conditions and high-grade pain from differential diagnosis. What type of company is this associated with? Is there an evidence of invasive prostate cancer? Are basal cells present? If they are present, they are complete or incomplete. So there are a series of these questions that can help us addressing this entire spectrum when you don't have obvious features of invasion. So this is our digital slide 3. And as you can see here, in this particular needle biopsy, you clearly have a component of invasive cancer. And invasive cancer at most places appears to be like pattern 3, but you do have some poorly formed glands as well. But then this proliferation is accompanied by numerous these large cribriform glands. If we pay attention to these large cribriform glands, they have a distinct outline. They show branching as seen in this particular example beautifully. So I find this branching a very, very helpful feature associated with intraductal carcinoma. Another thing to notice is that the proliferation within these atypical cribriform glands is clearly dense in nature. What I mean by dense is that the cytological proliferation accounts for greater than 50% of the luminal space. Also note the atypical cytology and amphophilic cytoplasm, the features that we talked about. And when you look at carefully, you can clearly see presence of basal cells as well. So in this type of example, where you have a clearly evidence of invasive prostate cancer, the presence of this type of glands suggests that you are dealing with a component of intraductal carcinoma. There may be some invasive spectrum as well. So in this type of situation, I think it is quite okay if you don't do basal cell marker, but if you are wanting to make a very perfect grade group determination, then I would recommend doing basal cell markers in this type of situation, as if you don't count intraductal carcinoma in the grading, then this is likely grade group 2 with intraductal carcinoma. But if you count intraductal carcinoma as part of the grading, then you are going to call this grade group 3 prostate cancer. Again, we will talk about that a little bit more in detail, but I think doing basal cell marker in this type of situation is quite reasonable. So let us talk about intraductal carcinoma of the prostate. Intraductal carcinoma of the prostate has two histological hallmarks: an expansile proliferation of prostate cancer cells in dense cribriform or solid architecture, and proliferation is within native prostate glands, so that basal cell layer is at least partially preserved. Several investigators have attempted to refine this histological definition of intraductal carcinoma, and the criteria which has been proposed by Guo and Epstein in prostate biopsy are now widely utilized. They propose intraductal carcinoma as large glands with lumen spanning atypical cells and preserved basal cells that demonstrate either of these four features: either solid architecture, dense cribriform pattern, marked atypical nuclei in which nuclei are 6 times of adjacent benign nuclei, or non-focal comedonecrosis. So if you have any of these four features, you can make a confident diagnosis of intraductal carcinoma. But for a lesion which lacks these definitional features but still is morphologically worse than high-grade pain, is referred to as an atypical intraductal proliferation or atypical intraductal proliferation suspicious for intraductal carcinoma. And I will talk more about that as well. So let us talk about this major features, those 4 major features. Here is a beautiful example of intraductal carcinoma. You can see this large cribriform glands with a dense architecture. You see beautiful branching pattern. Again, see this. When you see this type of branching glands, it almost guarantees you that you are dealing with intraductal carcinoma. You can also easily appreciate basal cells at the periphery of these glands. So the dense cribriform is defined as cellular mass occupying more than 50% of the luminal spaces. And dense cribriform can have irregular lumina or punched out lumina like DCIS of the breast. Intraductal carcinoma can also present with non-focal comedonecrosis. In fact, recent studies have shown that compared to Gleason pattern 5 prostate cancer, intraductal carcinoma, in fact, is more likely associated with comedonecrosis. Again, you don't have to do basal cells in every situation, but if you think that your grade could significantly be altered, then you could potentially do basal cell markers to see whether you are dealing with a pattern 5 comedonecrosis or intraductal carcinoma associated comedonecrosis. If you have only loose cribriform or micropapillary morphology, then you need those other 2 major features, either non-focal comedonecrosis or marked nuclear atypia, in which nuclear size is 6 times that of adjacent benign nuclei. And these particular morphological features or spectrum, in my opinion, are pretty rare. Vast majority of intraductal carcinoma is typically associated with a dense cribriform proliferation. There are several minor features that can also be helpful to make the diagnosis of intraductal carcinoma. Intraductal carcinoma typically involves many glands, typically 6 or more glands. We talked about irregular or branching at right angles, very, very helpful feature. Easily identifiable or frequent mitosis. And then another very helpful feature is 2-cell population with an outer pleomorphic cells and a central cuboidal monomorphic cells. So let's review these minor features. Here you see this involvement of numerous glands. Again, notice this beautiful branching pattern, and you have this presence of basal cells. So this is a beautiful example of intraductal carcinoma. Here is an example of this 2-cell population, outer tall pleomorphic cells and inner central monomorphic cuboidal type of cells. This is again very, very helpful. In general, when you see cytomeloplasmic pleomorphism, think about more intraductal related processes compared to invasive prostate cancer. Partial gland involvement is also a very helpful feature. And again, when you see this particular feature, think about intraductal processes. So in summary, the diagnosis of intraductal carcinoma of the prostate is based on constellation of architectural and cytological features. Due to its unique clinical and management implications, it is recommended that one should use this diagnostic criteria stringently so that the diagnosis is reproducible and patient receives sometime radical surgery only in those type of obvious intraductal carcinoma situations. So let us understand now the clinical spectrum of intraductal carcinoma in needle biopsy. Vast number of intraductal carcinoma in needle biopsy is associated with obvious invasive prostate cancer that is typically high grade and high volume. Infrequently, it is associated with grade group 1 prostate cancer. The least common scenario is when it is associated without invasive cancer, which is also known as a intraductal carcinoma only or pure intraductal carcinoma. But if you sample or rebiopsy these particular patients, then you are in a significant number of patients, you are likely going to find an unsampled invasive component. In only rare situations, you may not have any invasive component. So vast majority of intraductal carcinoma are considered to be a retrograde phenomenon, means the intraductal carcinoma is spreading within the pre-existing ducts phenomenon. But in a very rare situation, intraductal carcinoma has also been thought to be a potentially a precursor type of lesion. But again, this is quite controversial at this stage, and there are not kind of clear-cut evidence pointing towards both retrograde as well as precursor type of pathways, particularly precursor pathways. There is a good amount of literature supporting that intraductal carcinoma is typically a retrograde spread phenomenon. Another very important thing to understand is that contemporary studies have lumped invasive cribriform pattern 4 and intraductal carcinoma as cribriform architecture for prognostic and therapeutic decisions purposes. And the arguments to do this is that both are independent adverse prognostic factors. As I showed you, that majority of intraductal carcinoma also present with cribriform morphology. And then both are also associated with unique aggressive molecular features. So using this type of combined cribriform architecture approach, there are now several European studies, particularly coming from Dutch group. In this using this type of approach, Qualdum and colleagues showed that patients with grade group 2 prostate cancer harboring cribriform growth was highly predictive of post-operative metastasis and disease-specific death in grade group 2 prostate cancer. So data like this makes a strong argument that not all Gleason pattern 4 submorphologies may have a similar outcome. And if you have a scenario like this particular example, which I have outlined, where one patient is showing 20% of poorly formed pattern 4, while in another patient you have a 20% of cribriform pattern 4, is there a difference in outcome? Should there be a different treatment approach in this type of scenario? Should patient with poorly formed glands be eligible for active surveillance, while patients with any cribriform glands should be excluded from active surveillance treatment option? And I believe this is an important clinical question that we need to address in prospective studies. So I think you would agree that based on the data that I presented to you, that in vast number of kind of situation, the distinction between intraductal carcinoma versus invasive cribriform pattern 4 is essentially would be an academic exercise, because both are similarly associated with poor prognosis. But in two specific situations, I strongly recommend that you distinguish between two and use basal cell staining, particularly when you have a lack of definitive infiltrative carcinoma with a suggestion of intraductal carcinoma, and in the setting of low-grade infiltrative carcinoma, where documentation of intraductal carcinoma is necessary to correctly assign Gleason score to the case. So let us review this type of example. It is not recommended in the setting of already high-grade prostate cancer. In those type of situation, you can refer to those cases as prostate cancer with intraductal features. So here is a nice example from a 61-year-old male with an elevated PSA of 8 nanogram per ml. You can see here in this particular area, there is a proliferation of these small discrete atypical glands. So clearly, potentially a component of grade group 1. But then you see these numerous adjacent large dense cribriform glands. If we look at these glands a little closely, these are clearly atypical. They have a dense proliferation. They also appear to maybe have basal cells. But if I don't use basal cell stain and I consider that as a invasive component, then my grade would be essentially 4+3. But I decided to do the basal cell stain, and as you can see here, that the pattern 3 component is clearly lacking basal cells, while all atypical cribriform proliferation showed intact basal cells. So the correct diagnosis of this case is prostate cancer Gleason score 3 + 3 = 6 with extensive intraductal spread. And again, as I said, that if you consider intraductal carcinoma as a part of invasive component and don't distinguish between them for grading purposes, then you would essentially call this 4 + 3 = 7. So this is clearly one of the controversial hot topic in prostate pathology currently. The two societies, the GUPS and ISUP, are at odds. GUPS do not recommend grading the intraductal carcinoma component, while ISUP recommends grading intraductal carcinoma when it is associated with invasive prostate cancer. So I agree that scenarios like what I talked about, lack of having any infiltrative carcinoma with a suggestion of intraductal carcinoma, and this type of low-grade prostate cancer with intraductal carcinoma, they are relatively uncommon scenarios. So in vast majority of cases, if you don't do basal cell stains and consider part of intraductal carcinoma as a grading, you may be okay. But scenarios like this, it can make a difference, and I would recommend doing basal cell markers in this situation so that you can correctly assign the grade. So here is our case number 4, and this is the beautiful example where you can see this large mass forming, cribriforming and papillary glands. You can see here that these ducts are expanded by this cribriforming and papillary morphology. When we look at this morphology a little closely, you have a pseudostratified columnar lining epithelium, very important feature to appreciate, and slit-like lumina. Also notice a lot of papillary morphology. So presence of this papillary and cribriform morphology and glands which are lined by pseudostratified tall columnar epithelium, they are the definitional features of ductal adenocarcinoma. So when you have this type of morphology, you can make a confident diagnosis of ductal adenocarcinoma in this type of situation. I think another very important point to emphasize here that these ducts are within this proliferation is within these large ducts. That's a very important feature to appreciate. So here are some of the still images, and again notice this presence of pseudostratified columnar lining epithelium, slit-like lumina, which is better appreciated here. So ductal adenocarcinoma, vast majority are mixed with acinar prostate cancer. Pure example like these are relatively uncommon. They are graded as a Gleason pattern 4 or pattern 5 if associated with necrosis. I think very important to keep in mind that when ductal adenocarcinoma, they spread within pre-existing ducts. So if you do basal cell markers, you invariably will find some presence of basal cells within these ducts. That should not be confused with intraductal carcinoma or cribriform high-grade pain. And I typically consider this as an evidence of ductal adenocarcinoma. So the word ductal refers to morphology compared to location in intraductal carcinoma. It is a variant of non-acinar adenocarcinoma. It accounts for less than 1% in pure form, but typically seen in mixed ductal and acinar form. It arises and spread within pre-existing ducts or in peripheral ducts, and basal cells may be preserved. So I showed you some of the classic examples, but there are many other borderline type of situations where reporting and reproducibility of intraductal carcinoma can be challenging. Borderline cases can particularly be quite difficult to distinguish from atypical intraductal proliferation, which typically gets misdiagnosed as a high-grade pain. There is also controversy whether intraductal carcinoma should be quantitated in the cancer estimation. And then I talked about there is a significant controversy right now whether intraductal carcinoma should be graded or not. So with that, I move to my last case, digital slide. In this one, you can see there is a proliferation of these large atypical cribriform glands. You can beautifully see the amphophilic cytoplasm, and cytology is very atypical in these glands. But notice that the proliferation is loose in nature. What I mean by loose is that the cellular proliferation accounts less than 50% of the luminal spaces in this particular case. So this is an example of atypical intraductal proliferation, suspicious for intraductal carcinoma. There is lack of any invasive component. So you will agree that a condition like this, where morphology appears to be worse than high-grade PIN, but you do not have classic criteria of intraductal carcinoma. So these type of processes are referred to as an atypical intraductal proliferation, suspicious for intraductal carcinoma. And this is the very important lesion in my experience. They are often misclassified as high-grade PIN, but you should be able to correctly assign a right diagnosis to these lesions if you pay attention to these morphological details. So here are some still images from this case. Again, note this loose cribriform architecture. So they lack the classic criteria of intraductal carcinoma. So we studied these lesions in detail. We studied 62 such cases which had an outcome either as a prostate biopsy or radical prostatectomy. We specifically looked at 2 lesions, AIP alone and patients with grade group 1 and grade group 2 without any cribriform pattern. What I mean by cribriform pattern is if patients lacked either Gleason pattern 4 cribriform or intraductal carcinoma. So if we look at this AIP alone group, we had 12 patients, 6 patients had available follow-up, and of these 50% of patients at repeat biopsy had clinically significant prostate cancer. For patients with grade group 1 and grade group 2 without any cribriform pattern, vast majority of them presented with several adverse pathological features, either presence of intraductal carcinoma, grade group 3 or higher, extraprostatic extension, or seminal vesicle invasion. So the conclusions that we can derive from our experience is that patients with isolated atypical intraductal proliferation require immediate rebiopsy to rule out significant prostate cancer, because many of these patients on repeat biopsy would have clinically significant prostate cancer. And patients with AIP showing grade group 1 or grade group 2 without cribriform architecture, means no intraductal carcinoma or cribriform pattern 4, are not good candidates for active surveillance. So if we look at the morphology, they have many similarities with intraductal carcinoma. They also involve many glands. Branching is very common. But the most important difference is they are vast majority of them present with a loose cribriform architecture defined as cellular proliferation accounting for less than 50% of luminal spaces. In rare situations, they may present with marked cytological atypia exceeding high-grade PIN, but falling short of 6-time nuclear criteria. So here is another beautiful example of atypical intraductal proliferation. And again, I emphasize that you should not call these type of lesions as cribriform high-grade PIN in biopsy. And the reason, as I showed to you, is that you cannot confidently rule out intraductal carcinoma in this type of situation. So I do not make diagnosis of cribriform high-grade PIN in biopsy type of setting. Here is an example where there is a significant cytological atypia, but it is falling short of the 6-time nuclear criteria for the intraductal carcinoma. This is relatively uncommon presentation. We also looked at the molecular features of atypical intraductal proliferation with intraductal carcinoma, and both atypical intraductal proliferation and intraductal carcinoma has very similar molecular characteristics. They there is a high degree of concordance of PTEN loss and ERG overexpression in AIP, intraductal carcinoma, and associated invasive carcinoma, as shown here in 2 studies that we have conducted on this particular subject. So here is another example of atypical intraductal proliferation. You can see amphophilic cytoplasm, loose cribriform proliferation. You can also see presence of basal cells. So you may get tempted to call it cribriform high-grade PEEN, but when I utilized PEEN for ERG immunohistochemical stain, this gland showed ERG overexpression and classic PTEN loss. You can see strong internal control, which is very important to appreciate, but this gland shows complete lack of PTEN expression, almost looks like white glands. So this type of PTEN loss and ERG overexpression strongly suggests that this is not high-grade PEEN, but is an example of atypical intraductal proliferation, essentially an intraductal carcinoma. So in summary, atypical intraductal proliferation and intraductal carcinoma share topographic, clinical, and molecular similarities. Due to specific treatment implications for the diagnosis of intraductal carcinoma, the term low-grade intraductal carcinoma is not recommended. Instead, use AIP suspicious for intraductal carcinoma. As I told you earlier, if you have a classic intraductal carcinoma diagnosis, some of those patients may be offered a definitive radical prostatectomy as a treatment. And I think if we call this AIP as intraductal carcinoma, then we don't want to have a radical prostatectomy still for this type of situation. But same time, because of this similarity with intraductal carcinoma in many fronts, the diagnosis of cribriform high-grade PEEN is not recommended in biopsy setting, as some of these lesions could potentially represent intraductal carcinoma. Finally, be conservative, but high index of suspicion is necessary to avoid misdiagnosis as high-grade PEEN. Specifically, make sure that you don't overcall high-grade PEEN, and also you don't overcall central zone glands, those examples that I showed you as atypical intraductal proliferation. But be conservative with high index suspicion is necessary. I believe in some situations where you have a clearly evidence of ATP, a patient would benefit from a repeat biopsy. So this is a flow chart that I have used in my book, Prostate Biopsy Interpretation, and this is essentially summarizes what I discussed with you. So please feel free to follow this particular flow chart. So in summary, these are my take-home messages. Prostate cribriform lesions comprise a wide range of lesions from normal to pre-malignant to highly aggressive. In many situations, you will have to look for constellation of features, number of cribriform glands, presence of basal cells, morphology of the cribriform glands to arrive to a correct diagnosis. And in some difficult lesions, additional PTEN and ERG markers can help in diagnosis in borderline type of situations. But again, keep in mind that these are ancillary tools. Your diagnosis still depends on the careful morphological assessments. And if you have a lesion where you are strongly suspecting atypical intraductal proliferation or intraductal carcinoma, the presence of intact PTEN or lack of ERG overexpression does not necessarily rule out, because only 75% of these lesions typically show this molecular abnormality. So with that note, I thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to answer any questions.